The Stork Club, Manhattan, February 1946. When Lucky Luciano walked into the VIP room, every mobster at the table stood up except one. Bumpy Johnson kept his seat, cigar burning, eyes locked on the man who'd just unified the entire Italian Mafia. Luciano's bodyguards reached for their guns, but Luciano raised his hand because the black man sitting across from him controlled something Luciano needed more than muscle. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea or just some water, and sit back as we begin this journey together. Harlem's numbers racket. And what Bumpy said in the next 60 seconds would either forge an alliance that changed organized crime forever, or start a war that would paint New York's streets red. February 1946, World War II was over and America was celebrating. But in the smoke-filled back rooms of New York City, a different kind of war was brewing. Lucky Luciano, the man who'd modernized the Mafia, had just been released from Donora prison after serving 9 years. The government had made him a deal. Help us win the war by using your connections with the Italian docks, and we'll commute your sentence. Luciano had delivered, but there was a catch. Deportation. In less than 3 weeks, the feds were shipping him back to Italy permanently. And Luciano, being Luciano, wasn't going to leave without securing his empire. The 5 families were in order. Frank Costello was running the Luciano family in his absence. Vito Genovese was from Italy. Albert Anastasia controlled the docks. Everything was set, except for one problem: Harlem. The numbers racket. The illegal lottery that made millions every week was booming in Harlem, and the Italians wanted in. They'd tried before back in 1935 when Dutch Schultz muscled his way into the business. But Schultz had made a fatal mistake. He'd underestimated a quiet, sharp-dressed enforcer named Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Schultz ended up dead in a New Jersey tavern, shot to pieces. Now, 11 years later, Luciano wanted what Schultz couldn't take. But Luciano was smarter than Schultz. He knew you couldn't just roll into Harlem with guns blazing. You had to talk first. You had to show respect. You had to make an offer. So Luciano sent word to Bumpy Johnson. Let's meet. Bumpy didn't respond for a week. That alone told Luciano everything he needed to know. This wasn't going to be easy. The Stork Club on East 53rd Street was the most exclusive nightclub in Manhattan. Frank Sinatra performed there. J. Edgar Hoover drank there. And on the night of February 18th, 1946, Lucky Luciano reserved the entire VIP room. He brought 6 men with him: Frank Costello, his acting boss; Albert Anastasia, the Lord High Executioner; Meyer Lansky, the accountant; 3 bodyguards who'd killed more men than they could count. Bumpy Johnson walked in alone. He was 40 years old, dressed in a tailored 3-piece suit, navy blue with a crisp white shirt. No tie. He never wore ties. A gold watch chain hung from his vest pocket. His hair was freshly cut, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and in his right hand he carried a leather briefcase. The bodyguards moved toward him, hands reaching for weapons, but Luciano raised one finger. Let him through. Bumpy walked past them without a glance, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He pulled out a chair at the head of the table, the seat usually reserved for the boss, and sat down. He placed his briefcase on the table, then pulled out a cigar. Nobody moved. Costello's jaw tightened. Anastasia's hand drifted toward his waistband. But Luciano just smiled, because he recognized what Bumpy was doing. This wasn't disrespectful. This was a test. Bumpy was establishing the terms of the conversation before anyone said a word. Luciano took the seat directly across from him. Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming. Bumpy lit his cigar, took a long drag, and blew smoke toward the ceiling. Mr. Luciano, you wanted to talk, so talk. Luciano folded his hands on the table. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who'd negotiated with presidents and gangsters and knew the difference between the two. I'm leaving the country in 3 weeks. The feds are shipping me back to Italy. But before I go, I need to make sure New York stays in order. No wars, no chaos, just business. Bumpy nodded slowly, said nothing. Harlem is the last piece of the puzzle. Luciano continued. The numbers racket is making millions. My people want in, but I know you've been running things up there since Schultz died. You've got the trust of the community. You've got the infrastructure. You've got the police on your payroll. He paused, looking Bumpy directly in the eyes. I'm not here to take what's yours, Bumpy. I'm here to offer you a partnership. You keep running Harlem. We provide protection, investment capital, and connections. In return, we take 40% of the profits. You get to stay independent, but under our umbrella, under our protection. The room was silent. Frank Costello leaned forward, watching Bumpy's reaction. Meyer Lansky's fingers drummed softly on the table. Albert Anastasia cracked his knuckles. Bumpy took another drag from his cigar. What happens if I say no? Luciano's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. Then we have a problem, because if you're not with us, you're against us, and nobody survives being against us. It wasn't said with anger. It wasn't said with heat. It was said with the absolute certainty of a man who'd built an empire on that exact principle. Bumpy set his cigar down in the crystal ashtray, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a single photograph. He slid it across the table. Luciano picked it up. His face didn't change, but his fingers tightened around the edges. The photograph showed a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, one of Anastasia's gambling operations. And standing in front of it, shaking hands with a known police captain, was Albert Anastasia himself. That was taken 3 days ago, Bumpy said quietly. I've got 12 more just like it. Different warehouses, different cops, different members of your organization. The room went deathly quiet. Costello's hand moved toward his jacket. Anastasia stood up halfway out of his chair, but Luciano just stared at the photograph and then at Bumpy. Are you threatening me? No, Bumpy said. I'm showing you respect because I could have sent these to the district attorney. I could have sent them to the newspapers. I could have burned your whole operation to the ground before you even knew I had them, but I didn't. He leaned forward. You came to Harlem asking for a partnership. But a partnership means equals. And what you just offered me wasn't a partnership. It was a takeover with a smile. Luciano set the photograph down. For the first time since Bumpy entered the room, he looked genuinely impressed. So what do you want? Bumpy picked up his cigar, took a slow drag, let the question hang in the air. You want what Schultz wanted, what every Italian crew that's ever looked at Harlem wanted? Control? But you can't have it. Not because you're not smart enough. Not because you're not strong enough. Because Harlem isn't yours to control. He pointed to the window toward the lights of Uptown. You know why Schultz failed? Because he thought black people were stupid. He thought we would just hand over our money and say thank you. He thought muscle was enough. But Harlem doesn't work that way. You need trust. You need respect. You need to be one of us. And you'll never be one of us. Costello started to speak, but Luciano silenced him with a look. Bumpy continued. But here's what I will do. You asked for 40%. You can have 10% of the profits, not as protection money, as a service fee. You provide banking support. We need clean money to pay winners when the heavy numbers hit. You provide legal help when our runners get arrested. In return, you get 10% of the net. He leaned back, his voice dropping an octave. And one more thing, you never, and I mean never, send your people into Harlem to collect. You want your money, you send a courier to my office. I'll have it counted, wrapped, and ready. But your soldiers don't patrol my streets. Your guns don't show up in my neighborhood. Harlem stays black. Harlem stays mine. That's the deal. The silence that followed was absolute. Meyer Lansky broke it first. He turned to Luciano. Charlie, that's actually a smart play. 10% for essentially no risk, no overhead, and no exposure. It's clean money. Anastasia wasn't convinced. And what's to stop him from cutting us out once we set up the banking? Bumpy answered before Luciano could. The same thing that stops you from trying to take Harlem by force. A stalemate. You try to cheat me, those photographs go public, and your political protection evaporates. I try to cheat you, you come after me. With everything you've got, we both lose, or we both get rich. Your choice. Lucky Luciano stared at Bumpy Johnson for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly, he started to laugh. Not a mocking laugh, a genuine one. You know what, Bumpy? Schultz was an idiot. He should have talked to you first. He stood up, extended his hand. 10% banking and legal support. No soldiers in Harlem. And you deliver the money monthly. Bumpy stood, shook his hand, one firm grip. We have a deal. Frank Costello exhaled. Meyer Lansky smiled. Even Anastasia sat back down, the tension bleeding out of the room. Luciano held on to Bumpy's hand for an extra second. Let me tell you something, Bumpy. I've done business with presidents, cops, union bosses, killers. But you're the first man who came to my table and told me no without pulling a gun. That takes guts or stupidity. I haven't decided which yet. Bumpy smiled. A rare, genuine smile. When you figure it out, let me know. 3 weeks later, Lucky Luciano boarded a ship to Italy. He never returned to American soil, but the deal he made with Bumpy Johnson held for the next 22 years. The numbers racket flourished. Bumpy paid the 10% like clockwork. The Italians provided banking through legitimate fronts. When Bumpy got arrested in 1951 and sent to Alcatraz, Frank Costello personally made sure his family was taken care of. And when Bumpy walked out of prison in 1963, the deal was still intact. That meeting at the Stork Club became legend in organized crime circles. Not because of violence, not because of threats, but because two men from completely different worlds sat down and found a way to do business without destroying each other. Luciano would later tell associates in Italy, Bumpy Johnson was the smartest gangster I ever met, and the most dangerous because he didn't need me to respect him. He demanded it. Bumpy never talked publicly about the meeting. But people close to him said he kept that photograph of Anastasia in his office for the rest of his life. Not as a threat, as a reminder. Power isn't about who's willing to pull the trigger first. It's about who's smart enough not to. Does a king need a crown to be recognized? Or is his authority etched in the fear he never has to voice? History suggests that the world does not fear the man with the most guns. It fears the man with the most unshakable principles. In the concrete jungle of 1946 New York, Bumpy Johnson didn't just walk into a lion's den. He redefined who owned the cage. Facing the combined might of the Italian 5 families, he realized that borrowed power is a fragile mask, while self-made prestige is an iron shield. Street smarts taught him that a calm mind dissects a bullet before it's even fired, using leverage to turn a death sentence into a partnership. Perhaps the truth is that honor isn't about being liked, but about being essential. By positioning himself as the guardian of Harlem, rather than its conqueror, Bumpy forced the most dangerous men on earth to trade their ego for profit. Real power is knowing that loyalty to your community is the only currency that doesn't depreciate when the guns come out. In today's boardroom, or the streets, the lesson remains: never negotiate from a place of hunger, and never let them see your cards until you've already won the game. When the smoke clears and the titans have fallen, will you be remembered for the noise you made or for the silence you commanded?